We are in bed with books. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Bethany. If you'd like to find us outside of wherever you're listening from, then you can find us on our website, inbedwithbookspod.com, on Instagram at inbedwithbookspod, and find us on YouTube for video versions of the podcast and bonus episodes.
So let's jump right in.
So Taylin's back. I'm so excited. And we're going to talk about like one of our favorite people. I think we can all agree here, one of our favorite people in history. But I want to know how like your PhD is going.
Yeah. Okay. Do you guys want the gloss, the happy gloss answer, or the real answer?
Give us the happy gloss answer, but show true pain in your eyes.
Yeah.
So that way we can feel.
Yeah.
Going great.
Starts doing Morse code, blinking, asking for help.
Yeah.
She gets the twitch in her eye.
Yeah.
Always. It's a permanent fixture these days. So it's fine. I'm really excited for it to be over.
Yeah. How long have you been doing it? Like a year?
Too long, Bethany. Too long.
She's just started her second year.
Oh my gosh.
No, we're almost done with the first semester. Okay, Melissa, I've not just started. Don't make me like start crying.
I'm sorry. She's like, is this all a dream? Was it a dream? Do I have to start this over?
Yeah. It's like when you tell a kid like, oh, you're only 9 and they're like, no, I'm 8.5.
Yeah.
I'm 9 and 3
I feel like
quarters.
those months mean something.
Yeah.
I put a lot of work in those months.
Yeah. Okay. So don't take them away, Melissa.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Time is just meaningless when you're like relatively self-employed and don't wake up until 3 p.m.
Yeah.
I'm wearing the same clothes I used to wear like months ago, but now they're in style.
I know.
Nothing's changed for me.
We were talking about this the other day. We're calling it officially soup season.
Soup season, yes.
I can't, we're excited that we can wear clothes that match soup season.
Yeah.
This is the color of the soup that I even ate earlier.
Yeah. I'm like a nice
I'm not lying.
tomato basil.
I don't want to know that.
Yeah, this is my green acorn squash soup.
You literally look like green acorn squash.
Thank you. Taylin, you look like a red bean stew.
Ooh,
or a minestrone, but I think I get bean vibe from that sweater.
I am
like a kidney bean.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a soup. I'm an Oreo. Which I'm not gonna lie, are in my kitchen.
Yeah.
That's still acceptable, Bethany.
Yeah.
That's a great,
if you add it to ice cream and then kind of like do like a 9-year-old, like mash it up and kind of mix it up.
It could be soup.
It could be soup.
Yep.
Dude, when I was a kid, I used to do, that's how I used to eat ice cream. I used to mix it up until it was like soft serve and then be like, good soup. Like,
yeah. Noodle soup.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's because I have sensitive teeth. I can't bite ice cream.
Oh, I can't either. Yeah. Which means you ate too much ice cream or sugar, right? Yeah, like that's cavities.
My teeth have always been sensitive.
Whatever.
If you have a brain freeze, just put your thumb on the roof of your mouth.
It's my teeth that my teeth hurt.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's the fillings.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Then why don't I have?
It's because I don't think you give your body the chance to feel the pain.
Maybe.
Go to the same chiropractor. Okay, we go to the same chiropractor. And Taylin gets beat up. And afterwards, she's like, I guess I feel better. Like, she doesn't feel any of it. And the lady does the same things to me. And, like, I can't always, like, move my shoulders afterwards. I need it. I definitely need it. Yeah. But
do you have, a high pain tolerance? Or
Taylin, I don't know that Taylin feels pain.
At this point.
Yeah.
From sitting still for too long reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you there's this thing called the tiger tail, and it's just like a long rod that's been like properly kind of like encased in like squishy. So that way it doesn't really hurt you. It still hurts though, because you're just like rubbing this like rod, like down somebody's shoulder back and forth. Taylin loves it. In fact, she had the doctor show her fiance how to use it properly. So that way like she can get beat up between our visits to the chiropractor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like whenever they ask me, like, do you want me to use a tiger tail? I'm like, no, absolutely not. That will not be happening today. Thank you. I can't.
I could probably fill an entire podcast with you guys about the like bizarre responses I have received from sports and massage therapists.
Yeah.
I've been asked like, am I a wrestler?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, do I do rugby? Oh, am I a construction worker? That was one of the early ones too. 2015,
Yeah.
I got that. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, like just crazy stuff. Every time I get a massage, people like have something to say specifically about this.
Yeah.
Because I'm like always craning my neck forward reading, and it's like now it's like made of steel. It's so hard, rock hard.
Yeah.
It's like it's not good.
So, you know how like some people are more ticklish than others? I found out from, I think it was a masseuse several years back, that like what makes it ticklish is the tightness in your muscle. And because like when you press like either on like your neck or your sides, or sometimes like, you know how like guys used to do like the like kind of the top of the knee, like where it meets the thigh,
And it means that they love you.
no, well, that's what we thought. It's because the muscle is so tight. And so like there's definitely odd spots in my body that are ticklish because of that. I try pressing those spots on Taylin sometimes to like see how tight she is. She doesn't feel them. They feel like she feels nothing with it because she's so tight that it's just like surpassed tickling. Just into straight nothingness, into the void. Her body's just straight entered the void.
It really has.
Not to reinforce the foot fetish theme on our account, but like I can't get a pedicure anymore because I'm too loud. Like like I'm just like I'm like like oh like like I can't do it. And Milo gives me foot rubs often. Like it's not that I never get my feet touched. I just have really sensitive feet.
Well, you also like I realized this one after going to the chiropractor is like you have to have hard pressure sometimes. Like because you have to push it past
the limit.
Like, with my feet, when I get pedicures, I have to tell them, please press hard, otherwise I will laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like hard or nothing.
Yeah.
I would
go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I would say the same thing, like tell them to go hard, but actually I bruise so easily. I'm like I'm like an oxymoron. Like I bruise really, really easily, but I also
you're like
anything.
Maybe you
It is actually. It's been tested. It's too thick.
Yeah. No, there's this like episode of Friends where Phoebe, Monica wants a massage, so Phoebe's like, "Oh, I'll do it," and so she's got that like at-home business at the time, and so she goes over and she does it, and Monica like moans the whole time.
Yeah, she makes sex noises.
Yeah, and so like Phoebe's like, "I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it." So that's you, Bethany.
Yeah. I'm too loud.
You have to do it in the privacy of your own home. Monogamously
there can't be anyone around. Like,
she even closes the windows.
Yeah, so I put the cats in the closet. Like,
oh my god,
no. All right. So, now that we've
so we are in bed with books.
And y'all know us thoroughly now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is like, okay.
Yep.
A real episode. Yeah, so you can listen to us on Spotify. You're listening to us on Spotify. I'm sorry. I'm caught off rails, so you can just edit this out. But we're in bed with books. I'm Bethany.
I am Melissa.
And we're joined today with Taylin Nelson again to talk about our favorite lady. Since we all went and did the same program at King's 18th Century Studies, we all eventually come across the wonderful Mary Wollstonecraft. So we're going to kind of talk about her. Yes, but meanwhile, you can find us on Instagram at In Bed With Books Pod. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch us talk about film and see our faces. We put the video versions on there. So how do we want to start? I was kind of wondering if we wanted to like kind of talk about her, like life I think a little?
Or? Give a little bit of context for her, for people who don't know like all of the dirty details.
Yeah.
But because I also think she's one of the women who fully walked the walk when it came to her philosophies. And it definitely put some of her arguments into a much better context. So,
yes. Does anybody want to start? Nope. Okay.
Bethany's like, yes.
I was just like, I didn't know if anyone wanted to chime in. Well, I don't know. I think she was born at some point and then.
Well, wait, really?
Just kidding. I don't remember what year.
Real quick, Bethany, how do you know so much about her?
Well, I wrote my dissertation on her.
Bingo.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're all proud of you for that.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So I read a lot of her stuff. I also read a really good book, which I want to recommend to anyone who's interested in Wollstonecraft, but also her daughter, Mary Shelley. It's called Romantic Outlaws. Is this backwards?
No, at least not. Maybe it'll be on the
backwards
recording.
To me.
Yeah, no, it looks good to me.
Probably backwards in the recording. The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley. It's wonderful by Charlotte Gordon. And I like it because one chapter is Wollstonecraft, one chapter is Shelley, and on and on. And it's written in a very narrative way, but also like gives you a lot of like context and background. It's really good read. But she grew up, I think, in like the King's Cross area, Spitalfields, maybe.
Yeah.
In London, and trying to remember. She, her father was a drunk and her beat her mother. And so there was like a lot of times when she would stand in front of her mother's bedroom to keep him from coming in to. So there's definitely a lot of like understanding about like why she fought for what she wanted to fight for. But she met a lot of people along the way. I'm not going to go like into too much detail about who it was, but that like supported her. She ended up starting a school with her sisters and educating women. She was very influenced by the Blood family, which is her best friend was Fanny Blood. And I think it was her father that like encouraged her to write Education on the Daughters of Women. Correct me if I'm wrong. Someone did. I can't remember the names.
Fanny's father or her own father?
Fanny's father or Fanny, Mr. Blood. I can't remember. I think
no, that's fair. I want to make sure it wasn't her. Like, Mary's father who said so.
And she kind of got once she started the school and wrote the Education on Daughters, she kind of gained a little traction and kind of she got exposed to a lot of circles and kind of rose into these circles of dissenters and the Commonwealth men who were very interested in like the Scottish Enlightenment and the dissenters like Reverend Richard Price, who was very outspoken about the rights of man, and Joseph Johnson, who she described as being like a father or a brother to her. Who he published the Analytic Review and published her in it, and so that's where most of her works are being published, was through Joseph Johnson. I guess we could all agree that she is probably the mother of feminism in the Western world. She is most known for A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So does anybody want to talk about that work before we get further into her story?
I think one thing that gets kind of convoluted, I would say, when you say things, not you specifically, but like when it's said that she's the mother of modern feminism, is that like it's putting like the onus on her, but in reality, like she started the conversation. Not that the conversation didn't already exist. Like it definitely existed in some way. She's not the first person to have had these thoughts, or she's not the only person at this time to have had these thoughts. But the fact that she got published with them is huge.
Yes.
And the fact that like we're still reading it now shows kind of the weight of her arguments. And I would not say that they're all perfect. There's like rereading it now, like I'm engaging with it in a much different way than I did originally. And even back then, like some of my old notes, because this is like this was annotated originally when we read it for class, but also now that I read it again. There's definitely parts when what we would recognize today as white feminism is coming out, that kind of like, she's not necessarily defying the system. It's not like, what is it? What am I trying to say? Like her arguments aren't trying to break it down and rebuild a new one. It's definitely like trying to engage with the pre-existing kind of structures. But that being said, it's still such a radical, like the fact that this, which we would now recognize as not even that revolutionary, was revolutionary at the time, is in and of itself like a huge deal.
Yeah, I would add to that she was radical at the time, not only for her ideas, but the way in which she articulated them and the spaces in which she filled. This group of dissenters and circles that she was part of, she was the only woman in England until she went to France and she found some more ladies. But generally, she was like the only woman talking about this. And I can talk a little bit later about it, but she uses the way in which she writes and the form and styles that she uses is very masculine, while also including a feminine figurative style that is deemed feminine. So there were a lot of women writing, but they were writing letters and, nice poems and memoirs or things that were a little bit more traditionally feminine genres at the time. But she was doing philosophy, historical,
like a very explicitly male,
political,
male space.
Exactly. So,
and it's one thing. So like the women that she would have met in France might have been engaging in those kinds of conversations, like literal conversations in terms of like verbal face-to-face, maybe even like letter conversations. But very rarely would they have been engaging with it in public, long form prose work like this.
Yeah.
And not like, I'm not saying that they didn't want to, that they didn't try. And I can't because I can't say whether or not they did, but she was the one who got published in this and like disseminated to this extent.
And specifically within, as Bethany said, like within this kind of male language and male context, within this conversation that has been up until this point dominated by male philosophers. Like I'm thinking of Immanuel Kant in his What is Enlightenment, and he says that like people need to stop being cowardly and lazy and need to kind of like take control of themselves and their rights. But then he immediately follows it up with the caveat, well, except for women because they can't do that, right? So this is kind of directly speaking to that and directly engaging with that, as well as, of course, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who she is for a good portion. For anyone who reads this, it is a sick burn. Rousseau for a couple of portions of the text. And so she's directly engaging with the specific text of his, which is Amélie. Am I pronouncing that right?
What is it?
Amélie. Emile. So it's,
I think so.
It's his text on education for children as well. And so she's, because like the majority of this tract is really engaging with education, she has some really strong opinions to say not only about children's education, but also about women's education. So
yeah. And then I think that's all to say, like very specifically, that like a lot of the critique against some of her rhetoric is I would say founded. Like I don't disagree with the critique on some of the passages when she does get aggressively sexist, or when she uses metaphors that are possibly, I wouldn't even say possibly, but like definitely questionable metaphors relating to slavery and things. And it's not to defend those actions, but rather like historically recognizing that because she's entering this male dominated conversation, she's also going to use those male dominated kind of methods. And that's just going to come through.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, especially if you spend that much time with a group full of only men, like it's going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the conventions she really lays down thick is marriage. She and I didn't mention this in her very brief biography, but she watched her mother's marriage. She watched her sister's marriage. She actually grabbed her sister and her like less than a year old child. No, left the child actually. Took her sister because she was so depressed, and like took her away from her husband essentially, which is, you know, pretty baffling for the time. And they went and started a new school because her sister was just going mad. So she was very much spoke out against marriage. I think a little bit later in her writing career is she kind of eventually got to that point. And that comes in even in the revolution when she's in Paris. There was this really cool point in time before kind of shit went haywire, where women could own land. Everyone was having affairs and it was fine. She was in this like really great circle of people who were like, there was this one lady that was like French, and she just like wore like writing gear all the time and just had a sword. It was like really like intense. Like she was like, we should butcher the king, you know, like she was like really like into it. And so there was just like, I mean, that was very short lived. And then and then it became very, very anti-feminist, but so she really felt at home in that space. That was probably the one time she felt like she was, you know, original. She felt like she was seen as an intellectual being, not just a woman. So it was, I wonder, because we were talking about religion earlier, and so I'm kind of interested in that discussion and maybe when like marriage kind of became, that was definitely something her daughter and Percy Shelley like tried to relive, you know?
Yeah.
Well, marriage is such an interesting conversation, I think, with Wollstonecraft, because of course, I mean, I'm not trying to jump the gun here, and I'm not trying to get into the conversation of, you know, Mary Shelley right now, but I think it's like many people obviously commented on the fact that she wrote this extremely feminist tract and later, you know, married the anti-matrimonialist and anarchist of the time, William Godwin. And so, and also like, you know, neither of them, it's funny because both of them don't really believe in a traditional marriage. He didn't believe in marriage at all, William Godwin, and she believed it should be a partnership. And so it's a very interesting kind of like public relationship it became, especially after her death, when he wrote her kind of like her biography. Many people kind of criticized him, and especially because of her kind of sordid, sordid in the sense of like how it was perceived at the time. To us, we think she's a badass. We're like, gotta go. Get that Gilbert Imlay. We love that. For you.
Even though he was a dick, but
but like, but a lot of people were shocked that he would publicly publish on her kind of her varied kind of love life and past, and acknowledge it and still honor her in that way. So it's fascinating.
I find that I find it interesting because like on the one hand, it does feel kind of like this post-mortem like burn. Like this kind of like, well, in like this kind of like angered grief kind of like thing, but at the same time, like you're saying, their relationship was based on their philosophies regarding marriage, which like granted there are that's still like a huge hot subject, marriage within like within feminist circles and feminist discourse, because you have like the long tradition of it subjugating women because of like legal stances, but at the same time, like it in its own way doesn't have to, depending on the partnership and all of this stuff. And so I go back and forth on this, but at this current moment, on November 14th, 2021, when we're recording this, I kind of like that he did that, because he was like, look at this woman I loved.
Yeah.
And that I still love.
I feel like
he has to get remarried, but like, yeah.
I agree. Like, that's kind of a good way. I think it was kind of, this is what they stood for and this is what they fought for. And it was kind of like, kind of a last word. But it was just really unfortunate about how it was received.
Yes.
Because she was essentially wiped from the canon for 100 years, for 150, 200 years. And I feel like we should talk about that at some point, about how that's been affected.
If he'd have kept it in, that would have shown more for like the shame that he felt towards it. And I don't think he wanted to feel shame about what they stood for, you know?
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
If there was anything to be said about that family, it's that they lived their lives. They did not.
Yeah.
They lived by their philosophies. That's for sure.
Yeah. They did.
Yeah.
But I think like in terms of marriage in Vindications, it is very interesting. And I think very exciting, even still now, to read kind of what she says. Like I have like a quote here, if I can share. So, like in terms of kind of like, one thing that's really interesting about this text is it's definitely looking at kind of the female identity and how it is formed and how it is kind of based off of this conception, this idealized kind of conception of how women ought to be. And obviously this is kind of, you know, I think how this is connecting to marriage is that it's coming from their husbands, right? And so I think that's the way she's trying to access this conversation with the women readers of this text. So like, there's this kind of concept of like women serving their husbands. And this is also something that she's addressing in like an attack with Rousseau.
Yeah.
Because he is talking about how, you know, boys should be educated, but girls should just learn to be pretty and, learn
docile.
Talent. Yeah.
I think that's one of the words he uses. Yeah.
Yeah. And to learn how to serve their husband, like, you know, learn how to serve and to be, you know, useful in that sense. And that's kind of the specific mindset that Wollstonecraft is opposed to. And it's kind of like what's driving her to write this in reaction to Amelie.
Yeah.
Which, you know, and the quote was, you know, it proposed a model of female education aimed at making girls useful to men. So this is what she's against, right? And so this is where like marriage is kind of coming into it, because obviously at the time, like you guys have said, women were bound by law to like abandon their individual interests. They had to serve their husbands. It was English common law. And so women were held to like a different standard in kind of all senses of the term.
Yeah.
No, I agree. So I like what you said, Taylin, about specifically when like you made this point about like when she's talking to women in the text, because this is another reason that I think people don't acknowledge like why she gets shit on quite as much, is because she has two audiences with this. One, like the men within her kind of group of dissenters, as well as people outside of that, because I like you know for a fact she wanted Rousseau to read this.
Definitely.
So like men are very much as equal in her, like the weight of the audience that she's giving as women are. So she kind of navigates this like sentence by sentence, almost not even paragraphs always, of talking to men at one point and then the next phrase talking to women, which I think like I wouldn't say she does it perfectly, but she's doing it, period, which at that point is unheard of. Like you didn't talk to women, you talked about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I love is she wasn't, I think one of the things that really struck me about her was mostly is that she wasn't in the game of trying to stir shit up. She wanted to actually educate people on what it is to be a woman and what if they had the same mental capacity, like
it's not even like she's questioning it, but she says almost explicitly, she's like, you haven't even given us the option. You've just assumed that we don't. So maybe like let's say for like pity's sake even that you like give us the choice. If we don't, then that's fine, we continue on the way things are. But if you were to give every woman in this country the same opportunities that you give men and the same options that you give men, you'd be like greatly surprised. That's one of the first kind of like really aggressive paragraphs with like a lot of little hyphens and exclamation points that she has, where she's like, just give us a crumb of it and we can show you how ready we are for this.
Well, it's almost like, and I think it's so interesting because this is one of those moments where she is talking to like the male audience. Like it's like a misuse of power. Like, she's kind of saying like, one of my favorite quotes, she says, quote, "Who made man the exclusive judge if women partake with him the gift of reason?" Right. Yes. So she's kind of calling men out for exploiting their power in society to kind of pass judgment on women. And I think she's tying that in with religion a little bit as well, because like in the introduction, she says, nature, or to speak with strict propriety, God has made all things right, but man has sought him out many inventions to mar the work. And so I think that like, she's kind of trying to say like this kind of power that men have over women in society to kind of like oppress them, is this power, whatever they're trying to decide and manage and maintain like women, this power should lie solely in the hands of God. I think it's like, she's kind of asserting that in God's eyes, women are equal. So they're subject to the same moral law, and thus they should like, it's almost like calling men out and saying like, you're denying women their natural God-given rights. And so therefore you're committing a sin. It's like, it's really rhetorically brilliant, I think.
Well, and on top of that, looking like kind of like stepping back from just looking at her for a moment, the 18th century when she's writing this is like the age of rationality, the age of reason. And so what we're seeing culturally is the shift from men needing to be the strong, beefy, I can lift 2 bags of barley over my shoulders kind of things, like that in itself isn't serving people really anymore. It's not like it's suddenly not great or anything, like suddenly strength is viewed negatively, but rather that it's not as necessary to push yourself in society to have that kind of physical presence. And so one of the recurring things that she'll say is about the way that men are physically superior to women. And I do still have issues with that, but she's also writing from the point of rationality and reason, where like, it doesn't necessarily make them any actually better within like a cultural, social context to be physically stronger than women. And I mean, it's another one of those things where like, we still argue about it today. It's like, yes, there's physiological differences between men and women. Whether that makes one of them more superior to the other is up to debate.
Yes. Because there's things men can't do that we can.
Yes.
And
like
I think
pushing a watermelon out of.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, exactly. Is like the notion that the way that they're stronger than us and kind of like the everyday kind of like they tend to be taller on average, tend to be, not always. But like in those little ways doesn't necessarily, she's almost kind of like, again, like rhetorically, like she's just saying like, it's not necessary now, because her stance was about reason and rationality. And like, yes, she melds that in with nature and God, but she's like, at no point does she necessarily say that their physical superiority actually makes them better than women.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of a thought that came up was, also what's happening culturally in the 18th century, philosophically, and just what's kind of happening in the canon of thought, between thinkers, right? Like Rousseau and Addison and Kant is this individualistic idea, which is almost opening up the door for Wollstonecraft to then look at herself, right? As a woman.
The big question of I.
Yes. And so she wants to be part of that conversation of, okay, so how do I cultivate myself to be as superior as men, right? And that is through education and being given the opportunity. And I do like, so she kind of, to get into a little bit more of like the nitty gritty of this philosophy, like Rousseau really believed that passions, or I guess I'm trying to remember exactly when they speak of passions, that generally means like
it's a good thing.
Yes.
So Rousseau is of the camp that like essentially society has kind of degraded, society and luxury has degraded kind of our kind of inner moral life, and we were actually better off, even though like, you know, it's the noble savage is the phrase that he kind of coins and uses. But essentially the idea that he was a proponent of was the thought that like we were better off in a state of nature, whatever that means. But that, you know, so while we may have been like less advanced, we were more happy and more free and passionate.
Yes. And one thing he believed too was passions are what distinguished man from animals, because man has the moment to obey impulse or resist it. And so that is freedom. Yes. But what Wollstonecraft disagreed with him on one thing was that, so Rousseau believed in the perfectibility of man, that, you know, he could cultivate reason and become, but she believed that the chase was the reward, that like, just so like her idea of becoming perfect and enlightened was having practice, being able to cultivate reason through experience. And one needs the opportunity to have that right in order for them to have the experience in order to cultivate. I keep saying the same word, but it's there.
No, I mean, it's a
really good word for the
It's empirical. It's like empirical knowledge, right? Like you're through experience, you get to know yourself and the world around you. This is like major in that time period.
And it allows people to have agency over themselves and their lives, which make them better people morally, according to Wollstonecraft.
I find that interesting, bringing it into kind of like a modern context, because so like this big buzzword for progressives nowadays is like be woke, stay woke.
Yeah,
you got to be woke. But what people don't know, for the most part, this is not new. But the word actually derives from African-American lingo in like the 80s and the 90s, I think it was. And I'm happy to be corrected on that. But the original intent of it was to like stay aware. You had to like, because you had to stay aware of cops, you had to stay aware of the white people that were moving into the neighborhood. Suddenly, like the sudden influx of that, and like Starbucks that were arriving. So it wasn't intended as this like end point, almost like Rousseau is standing on, but this constant like praxis that Wollstonecraft was emphasizing.
Wow. That's so interesting in terms of like how Wollstonecraft is envisioning an enlightenment being a journey, like
a constant,
that's a good connection.
Well, I find it interesting too, because when like we had kind of previously talked about, is that she doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the walk. Her and like Godwin specifically, like they had their philosophies and they chose the life to live by it. And so it's not just that she was like touting all of this stuff and then one day got married and became the docile wife. Even after she got married, they were still very actively practicing these things.
And I'm pretty sure that they lived in separate homes. I mean, I'm also happy to be corrected on that, but I'm pretty sure they lived in separate homes and they had a really kind of open household. And I mean, you know, obviously we all know that, you know, Mary Shelley, like when she gave birth to Mary Shelley, you know, she passed a few days later. But it was like this very kind of salon style household. And we can imagine that being still present before her death, I think, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like she was very open to being in dialogue and talking about these things with groups of people who also wanted to talk about them.
I think she was very conscious in a way that like the male philosophers in this sphere weren't, of social conditioning, you know, like in a much more critical way than they were. Like they could tout all of this stuff that they wanted, but at the end of the day, they came back and they treated their wives the same shitty way that their neighbors who weren't philosophers were, or they treated Black people the same shitty way that their uneducated neighbors did as well. Like it's just on this whole new level of like, they would recognize that things are social conditioning, but they're like, but that's because it's the natural order of things. We're just reinforcing the natural order.
I think
she recognizes it as a very human imposition.
I think it's safe to say too that even the white men that she was surrounding herself with, who were very radical thoughts, you know, they're British white men, like they're, you know, it's like, and to recognize that she, you know, and it appalls me that, you know, people today say, well, I just don't understand. I've literally heard people say, I just don't understand what Wollstonecraft, she wasn't saying anything new, you know, and
at the time she was,
and she absolutely was because I mean, it's just like, she was just, and I think part of being stripped from the canon has really affected modern scholars today in this way, because we're not like, the conversation about how, you know, how to be free mentally is happening much later than I think it should have. That conversation that she was able to have with white men because she was a white woman. Like, yes, she was a woman, but she was still privileged to be in those groups of people who believed in the same things that she did, but she was able to assert her theology theory on education as being kind of the cornerstone of change and independence.
Cause she like, and that's what I mean too, is her conception of social conditioning, I think heavily relies on her opinions and her experience when it comes to education. Cause she was also privileged in that way. She did have a pretty good education for somebody of her standing, being a woman. And so I think that's also like a reason why she engages with social conditioning and with education so much differently, because she saw firsthand how different it was for her. Compared to other women.
And I think that like, well, it's interesting. And I would be interested in hearing you guys' thoughts on this. Like, it's interesting that there isn't really a conversation of like class going on here, even though it's clearly something that is like being, like it is like her audience is very clearly middle to upper class women. And then of course, you know, middle to upper class men. And it's interesting to think about just generally, like as an aside, like, who is she writing to and how are these things getting discussed and by whom? Like, you know, because it's like, you know, how quickly did this, you know, I'm interested in like, and maybe you guys have an answer for this, like how quickly did it spread? Like how popular was it at the time? Like those are some questions that I have just generally, but I do think like it's very obvious that she is like targeting a very specific like class of women who I think, you know, probably are within similar kind of means as she is. And that's why she feels like maybe the need to teach them, I guess, because she feels that I think she just is just in general frustrated with like, I think in a similar vein to Rousseau, she's frustrated with like luxury and excess. And you can see that in like her kind of asides, her like empirical observations where she's denigrating like women of luxury, women of taste, like taste being this like kind of socially constructed idea for her that men have decided like, you know, women should be into, you know, makeup and clothing, and they should be coquettes, and they should, you know, act a certain way, and act as if they didn't have a brain. And so like, yeah, I think for her, like she is interested in, I think, both demonstrating how women can think in a logical kind of more empirically driven way by like in a meta way, by publishing this, by being able to get this out there. It is like proof, you know, proof in the pudding that it is possible to kind of like to do this and to think this way. But she is, of course, also like very kind of, you know, satirical and harsh on women. And I think it's because, you know, I think part of it is her kind of demonstrating like, okay, kind of like almost like a wake up call, like women need to rethink what they think taste is, because it's almost like a brainwashing for them, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys like think about all of that. I know I just word vomited.
No, I love it. I love all those thoughts.
There was one line, and I'm mad at myself now for not marking it, but she has one line, and it's kind of like in a previous paragraph, she had said something similar where she talks about like the luxury and the taste and the coquettishness. But then pretty quickly after that, she acknowledges the fact that we're also doing these kinds of things to survive. It's not that we want to be like this, and maybe some women do. And she's like, that's whatever. But when you're only giving us this option, you're very much creating an environment where it's unsafe for us to do otherwise. And so she's at the same time, like the book is itself, the Vindications is itself this act of practicing what you preach. Just like doing it, like you said. And so she's, in the fact of just like putting it out there, she's saying we can do more. We just need somebody to hold our hand and do it with us. Because it's not social conditioning if it's only you doing it.
Yes.
Of course. Go ahead. I can see you
also,
like,
yes. Yeah. I think I found the quote, and you can tell me if it's a quote or not, but I love this quote. And I think it's like so relevant for just thinking like in terms of social construct and like ideology being kind of a man-made thing that we can rethink and reconfigure, which I think is exciting. So one of the quotes is, considering the length of time that women have been dependent, is it surprising that some of them hug their chains and fawn like the spaniel?
Yep.
These dogs, observes a naturalist, that would have been kind of like a scientist at the time, at first keep their ears erect, but custom has superseded nature, and a token of fear is become a beauty. Right? So like custom is this kind of social custom that's dictated by man, right? So I think it's just so interesting the way like it, and I think she has other quotes too, where it's like, you know, women learn to like adorn their cage, right? Adorn the cage that they live in. And it's in these moments where like specifically, I think connecting it to the figure of a dog and kind of thinking about domestication and how domestication is not, it's a socially constructed human endeavor to, you know, create animals to be within a certain kind of human accepted construct that we find acceptable. Right. And so I think that like alluding to the dog in that way kind of helps maybe her readers, or helps us like think along the lines of like, what is natural in this moment, and what is socially constructed.
And then tying it back just real briefly and quick to the question of like man versus woman audience.
Yeah.
Is that because this treatise is engaging with both audiences, regardless of whether or not this is directed at women to kind of like open their eyes or directed at men to be like, look, the men are going to read it. The men are going to read these parts. And for the, like, possibly the first time for some of them, they're going to have to engage with the fact that women are not as pleased with this as they might like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the, you know, the fear becomes beauty, right?
Yep.
Like we learn to hug our chains, but that doesn't mean that we're happy with it.
I was just, I just rewatched The Fall, which is that like crime drama with Jamie Dornan and Gillian Anderson. And since it's several years old, I'm going to slightly spoil a bit for you. For you guys, regardless, like whether or not you've seen it recently, and for people listening / watching, but in season 2, he kidnaps a woman that he had known previously. And people keep being like, why would she just leave? Like, why would she just walk out with him all easy and fine? And it's because we don't generally acknowledge until quite recently, it's like in psych kind of conversations, we always think fight or flight, but freeze is like a very common one just as well. Yeah. Like it's a survival. It's like a trauma response. Your body just kind of convinces you that you're not in danger and you don't react and you just do what they say. And that is like as I was watching this, I just thought about kind of that conversation that she has where it's like, you make your chains look pretty because at that point you can't conceive of any way out of that system.
And when Wollstonecraft speaks to women, she's giving them a door.
Yeah, exactly. Like this, adding this to the conversation, which again, even though it was removed from the canon, but her attempt to add this to the conversation of the question of I, is that like adding that door. Yeah.
To answer your question kind of about like thoughts on class and how like, I don't know if you were referring to just because she was talking to like the middle classes. But my thoughts on that were like, I think the 18th century was very much, I mean, and we can see this with the revolution, boiling in terms of class structures.
Yeah.
And the bourgeoisie was kind of this growing thing due to consumerism.
Yep.
Yeah. We're definitely seeing this like history repeating itself.
Yeah. Consumerism creates a middle class, which creates almost a weird mode of change because the laboring classes have no power or rights, and the court has no passion to change anything. And so the bourgeoisie kind of see themselves as kind of distinguished from corruption, but also distinguished from being idle, which is strange because they're actually the most idle.
It's like I think it's the labor, Christian kind of like mindset.
It's also like a very kind of like growth of capitalism, like the root of capitalism, that kind of like we need to be productive all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, so in the French Revolution, when that kind of started breaking out, a lot of the dissenters in the English were really excited, and then we can kind of move into kind of the Burke conversation. But we have like a lot of people speaking about like, well, what's going on? How are they like, when I think it was when they the French published the Declaration of the Citizen and Man or something like that, where it gave rights to people.
Was it the French National Convention? They like abolished the monarchy the same time that this like text came out.
I love it. You say abolish the monarchy instead of just like beheaded.
Yeah.
Abolish is a much
the PG version.
Word. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was, I think it was before they beheaded King Louis, but it was a lot of events going on. But but they released a document that essentially said that everyone has rights, every man. And the English were just like, so there's a lot of discussion going on.
The English were like, wait. We just colonized half the world.
Yeah.
And now you're just going to say that.
Seriously.
Yeah.
No.
Seriously.
This goes against everything we believe.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you have like the Scottish Revolution happening in the 1740s. And then you have the American Revolution happening in the 1770s. And so we already have established equal rights, right?
Well, and one thing just real quick that's funny is the tone in England about the French Revolution was relatively positive.
Yes.
In terms of like the rational like reasoning group. But when it happened in America, they were like, well, now this is just, this is not okay. This is like, they're just like, that's not how you do this. Well, what's funny is
it happened in America first, right? They got rights. And so that was like, no, that can't happen, but then the French, they're just kind of like, oh, I mean, I wouldn't say everyone was excited about it. Obviously, there's people like Edmund Burke and
it would be like the same person would have just like varying. I think it was Burke actually that we were talking about specifically in class.
He was supportive of the American Revolution. Yeah.
Okay. No, there must have been somebody else, but like there was one specific person. It's going to bother me that I don't remember.
Yeah.
Who like when the American Revolution happened, were very adamantly against it, and then just like a few years later, the French Revolution happens, and they're like, oh well, now see, this is fine.
Yeah.
Kind of like a respectability politics kind of version of it too, where they're like, well, this is how you actually do a revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is
because we're not involved.
Is
we're not the patriarchy of this country.
Yeah.
Is the word revolution changed its meaning in the 18th century. The revolution, the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when King Charles, that was a reinstallment of monarchy. Of a system.
Yeah.
And Burke speaks about this as being like a very good thing, that we need it was the return to the original institution. Like we're back home,
Yeah.
It's not creating anything new. And the American Revolution, he felt was okay, I can't remember why, but I remember him being supportive of the American Revolution because I think he was just saying they just want to create their own country.
Yeah.
And the French Revolution he was not a fan of because it was giving, I'm sorry. I'm terrible.
No, you're good.
I remember he was supportive of American, right?
I do remember, and I can't remember part of this conversation in our class. So let me kind of ramble for a second and maybe it'll come to you. So like the root of revolution, if you think about the word revolution, it means like the turning of a wheel.
Yes.
And that was like a big symbol kind of, and I don't want to say just the 18th century. It's been a symbol for many years. It's kind of like an archetype, like a Jungian archetype. It's in the tarot. It's in like basic art, religious art.
Well, it means to revolve.
Well, yeah, but I mean like the wheel itself. And so that's, so like the wheel of fortune is basically what it is. And it's not like the game show. Like the mentality or the thought around it is that sometimes you're at the top of the wheel and life's going pretty good. And sometimes you're at the bottom of the wheel and life's pretty shit. And that's just the way like things go.
Yeah.
And so originally the term revolution didn't mean this kind of like rising up and you're defeating the tyranny and you're fighting side by side with your brothers, like that image of liberty leading the people, that like French painting. That's what we think of now when we think revolution.
Yeah.
But the reality is that socially speaking, like culturally, socially, historically speaking, rebellions are constant because the political pendulum swings back and forth as time goes on. And that's not to belittle things. That is just like the nature of humans existing within civilization. Eventually political heat builds up and we need to let it out.
Yeah.
And so these were viewed as like the revolutions, like the literal revolutions of the wheel.
Yeah.
Of the social wheel.
Yes. It was Hannah Arendt who said that the French Revolution was a successful revolution in that the revolution, the meaning of the word revolution was successful in that something new, absolutely brand new happened. In America, nothing new happened because you excluded slaves.
It was just
not
like
every
England
man.
2.0.
Exactly. And I think that's why Burke was supportive of it. Americans' revolution wasn't really new. But what happened
I was thinking of Arendt.
I think you were, because I remember this discussion and your rambling actually helped me remember that discussion. But what happened in the French Revolution was that based off of necessity, you had a group of people who were starving, and based off of bodily need or necessity, changed the course of a country, stormed and became violent, right? And so over the course of the French Revolution, many, many events were dictated off of the happiness of the people, which has never happened before. And so what you have is the private, which was the poverty, the people who were hidden in shame, are now at the forefront of the decisions being made in politics.
The laboring class.
And that's never happened before on this scale, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why Arendt believed that it was a successful revolution in that way, because it was the first time that man's coming in a torrent to create change by force and by necessity changed the course of history. It was not from you know what I mean? It was from necessity. It was from bodily need.
And on top of that, one thing that historical studies just within the last couple of decades has really started to acknowledge and turn more towards in looking at the historical record is realizing and recognizing how much of it is skewed because of privilege. Because we don't have the voices, even though we know about the French Revolution, we don't have many of the actual voices of the laboring and the working classes that drove that revolution. We have the philosophers speaking about it. We have the positive and negative responses, but we don't have the families that starved to death because they overworked themselves. We don't have the children that were orphaned because they never learned to read or write. And so there's just this very big part of the conversation. And this isn't exclusive to that. This is a problem up until just about the 20th century with history, is that the record is very, very biased.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a big conversation. Who's dictating history? Who's writing it?
One of my favorite things, and I think I said this to my father at one point, because this was when I first started doing English studies, and he was really just wondering about it. But you get just writers that we love now, Byron or Shelley or Keats, even, where they would write all day. And you're how did they have the time to write all day? And it's because they had people doing everything else for them, because they had a summer home and a winter home, and they went and they vacationed for 3 or 4 months in Italy and in Mont Blanc and all of these places. But because they had servants, we just don't hear about the servants. We didn't learn about them until recently. Not that we learn about them specifically, but they're this nameless, invisible labor force that made it possible for these things to exist.
So the quote that I'm trying to explain, and no, not at all. My lack of articulation. But she says, this multitude appearing for the first time in broad daylight was actually the multitude of the poor and the downtrodden, whom every century before had hidden in darkness and shame. What from then on has been irrevocable, and what the agents and spectators of revolution immediately recognized as such, was that the public realm, reserved as far as many could reach to those who were free, namely carefree of all the worries that are connected with life's necessity, with bodily needs, should offer its space and its light to this immense majority who are not free because they are driven by daily needs. And so it's this, it's actually and this is where I'm kind of bringing back the question about class, is that the middle class is able to articulate and blur this line. I feel
Absolutely.
like, and recognize and fight for the downtrodden, these people that don't have a voice, and recognize that the corruption of the top. And so I think it is interesting how the middle class works in that way, namely the British middle class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not like the middle class as we recognize it today.
No.
The middle class as we recognize it today is much closer to working class back then.
Yeah.
It's just like this, the difference between the middle class and the higher classes has become so vast that like the higher, the larger that gap gets, the worse off the middle class gets. So as that gap grows between the classes, the middle class, once again, gets kind of fucked over because they bear the weight of that gap. And so again, jumping back to the original definition, the original intent of the word revolution is it's kind of like the turning of the wheel. History repeats itself, but it's not in a negative way, just in a fact of like humans repeat the same kind of cycles.
Yes. And to add to that is a big portion of my dissertation was on the mental faculties of imagination, and how it works in the social realm. And so there was this movement going on, with the aesthetics of novelty. So you have Joe, I forget, it starts with a J. His last name is Addison, but he,
Joseph.
Thank you. I think it was pretty early 18th century. And he talked about how what we take in the social conditioning again, but what we take in from like the social gets works into the mind, and then the mind's imagination creates novel ideas that then is put back into the social civic world, and actually creates change or something novel, something that's never happened before. And as we also see with the 18th century and in the Enlightenment, you have Darwin, who is saying, we're not the center of the universe, but also he's saying we are kind of the center of the universe, and that we can create new things, and kind of taking God and the divine and realizing that the divine lives within us and in our imagination and in our ability to create. And even John Milton in Paradise Lost kind of describes this with Satan walking from chaos to creation.
Oops.
Wait, sorry, a question. So are you saying Darwin as in Erasmus Darwin, the poet?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to
Sorry,
clarify.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
I forget there's Charles as well.
We're all from like humanities departments. We don't really pay attention to Charles Darwin.
No. not our scope of expertise.
Also, I'm sorry if you saw me like start chuckling. It's because Seymour, her cat, her demon son, is like screaming in the hallway right now.
It's more like mewling pitifully, but yeah. And trying my best not to cry or listen.
He's fooling all of us.
He is.
Yeah.
I swear I'm not abusing him. He lives the best life.
Yeah. So this go ahead.
Well, just like also in response to that is like, there is, let's bring it back to Wollstonecraft a little bit. Yeah. So she incorporates a lot of religion because she was raised within it. And so it was still very much a part of her heart, I guess, for lack of like a better word. But she has one of her digressions during this. She basically argues that, one in the vein of free will, because that becomes a big thing, is like free will versus fate. And so she's definitely of like the free will pool. But what she essentially says is the fact that we have free will, both men and women, means that we are both entitled to agency. Mm-hmm. And so I also kind of love your comparison with Milton, because his argument, like what he's essentially like purporting in Paradise Lost, is that the only reason Satan is as we see him is because he sought like individuality. Mm-hmm. Not that he sought like evil or that he was attempting to be God. He was just attempting to be I, which is like the big, mm-hmm. again, like the big question back then. Mm-hmm. So her assertion is that the ability to say, I am, to act on it and to make the choices that reinforce your own I am, entitles you to rights as like a human.
Exactly. In contrary to what Burke believed, which was that if we want to get real nitty gritty, he believed that morality was placed in our natural instincts. So we are, which creates a bad class system, because he believed that the vulgar were just vulgar because of who they were. Morality is in the natural instinct. Reason happens after the passions have made a moral judgment. Whereas Wollstonecraft believed that passions were the fuel and instincts were the fuel to exercise reason and cultivate better understanding so that you can make better moral decisions.
Yeah.
And so the perfectibility, right, is that.
Well, it's very ignorant of like the capacity of people generally. Because that's one of the things, like the line that one of you had quoted earlier. I don't know if it was when we were just talking or like when we had finally started recording, but where she says something along the lines of like, if my fellow women may, I won't be talking down to you. I won't be belittling you. I won't be just like infantilizing you, because I believe you capable mm-hmm. of better things. Whereas Burke's whole argument is basically, well, this is the way it is. This is the natural order because other men like me say it is. And I can say this because I have privilege that I've refused to acknowledge.
Well, what's interesting is he's
thank you.
Yeah. So you have right, the mother of feminism. He's the father of conservatism.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, this is what most people. This is what.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but this is how obviously this was how everything was governed, and people were governed, and so he's just kind of digging his heels in, and
that's why he got
wrong
published.
Side of history. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is like if he's just saying what everyone agrees with, of course they're going to publish him because people want to read it.
Yeah, it's like it's the counter argument, you know.
Yeah.
One of the most enjoyable reads was Mary's vindication of the rights of man.
Yeah.
When she just takes every little thing that he said in Reflections of the Revolution and just tears him by
line. She's like
tears him apart.
Wrong.
Love that.
And I remember like being in that class and messaging you. I'm like, this sentence, like she's just on it. Like I just love her prose. She is incredibly enjoyable to read.
Well, it's like the 18th century version of like coming in with the receipts. Like you've got the screenshots. She had the screenshots and she like drew on there and she's like, this is what I mean. Yeah. So we don't like Burke.
Yeah. But it was such an interesting discussion that was happening that needed to happen, which was, do men have the right to have rights? Can we trust, men, individual men, even the ones who are making bad decisions in the lower classes and the higher classes, everyone, because that, and Wollstonecraft explains it in her historical account of the Revolution of how badly the people were acting, right? And in such desperate situations. and kind of making her justifications for why that is. But, you can't, can we trust the individual to make good decisions for himself? Right. That was a valid point, I think, at the time, because it was never, we had never experienced that before. And so when does morality set in, right, in the mind? And then again, going back to Wollstonecraft's education, and this is why I think she is saying something new, is because of her stance on the education of women and their mental capacities and their ability to cultivate reason and things like that is directly reflected in man's ability. Yeah. All men to be able to, once given the right, then has the ability to cultivate reason and have agency over their lives, and be able to exercise in the social sphere, right? The imagination and creating new ideas. And so, there's just like a lot of really cool conversation that I love.
And like, there's one thing that you said, and I can't remember what it was specifically, just 30 seconds ago. I'm doing great. But that, like, if we give the people, this was in relation to like the question of morality and like having rights. If we give the people the resources to not have to steal, to not have to sleep on the street, to not have to go months, or I guess at this point, like years, without a bath, then what you have is a society, a population that is more capable of making what is deemed like moral decisions, because there is so much like right and wrong. Like, let's just really briefly think about like Les Mis. What is the core of Les Mis is that he stole a loaf of bread and now he is paying for it for the rest of his life. Yeah. And he stole the loaf of bread, we know, from the single line where he says it was for my sister and her dying son, her starving son. Yeah. And so what they've done is created a system where now he has to pay forever because of that, even though he is, within the story, this arguably very, very devout and divine man. And society just doesn't recognize it. Go ahead, Taylin.
I have 2 points before I forget them, because my brain is not a sponge. It is like a dry towel.
It's a duck.
In response to you, yeah, absolutely. I think what's so brilliant, though, about like her doing this is that it is 100% within the male 18th century logic of the Enlightenment. Not only is she like using logic, so by the logic of, if we feed these people, then they will, behave more like, moral citizens. They will be able to engage in society and be like useful and, have meaningful lives. Like literally like using logic to like sort out these situations, I think is like, that is the language of the 18th century, male philosophers, right? And then secondly, like this kind of utopian vision of universalism where, we can have a better society. This is her ultimate goal. And this is also the ultimate goal of the 18th century philosophers. So I think it's like just really powerful that she's using these kind of like techniques to propound something that is, very new, because I think like, not only is it working within like a tradition that other people are going to have to respect and understand, because it is within their own tradition, right? But it's also like kind of like what Melissa said, it's like forcing you to have to see probably a side of society that they want to ignore, which is women. And they often just write women off or disregard them in these conversations. So I love that she's like co-opting their own kind of techniques and forcing them, but forcing them to allow women into the conversation. I think it's great. Sorry.
Especially because no, it's a really good point, because like she uses these techniques that they've deemed to be like official, or that they've deemed to be like the most logical, or the most well thought out, the most empirical. Yeah. And she's using it against them. She's like, you can use these same tricks and you can come to other conclusions.
Yes.
You can
That's
come
what
to
I
more
love about her.
like equitable conclusions.
Yes. Yeah. So baller.
Yes.
Yeah.
So cool. Hero.
What was I going to say? Oh, it was about Burke. I had this thing when we were in class, the one day that we talked about Burke, and I loved because the professor, he was like, he didn't say anything against it. He was like, interesting. Why do you think that? But I don't think Burke had any actual friends.
I remember you saying that.
Yes, because that's how I started the class.
We're like, teacher.
Yeah. Yep. So in his reflections on the revolution in France, he starts with his which is normal during this period to have the epistolary beginning to the treatise. He says, "I certainly have the honor to belong to more clubs than one." And I'm just like, do you really need to say that? Like, clubs isn't it's what we think of today, where it's like you get together, you talk about certain things. But he's just like, yeah, I belong to so many clubs, you guys. I'm in so many clubs. I'm in that one, and also this other one. We get it, Burke.
You kind of imagine him definitely during this time and getting published, because he's in Parliament, I think. He's definitely doing stuff. Yeah. And he's he's Irish. He's not, he's definitely trying to prove himself. And I think by making these stances, he's definitely positioning himself.
He drank the Kool-Aid. Well, he's trying to be look how English I can be.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
exactly.
it's worth noting, and if I mess this up, you can just cut it out. But I'm pretty sure, so at the time, it being Irish was not at all how it would be conceived of today, as a kind of massive conglomerate of British kind of peoples. It was strictly divided nations and peoples. And so being Irish in London still was kind of this considered as this lower station.
Yeah.
So it's just worth noting that that's probably where his kind of need to prove himself is coming from.
Yeah. Yes. We think very heavily, because I think Bethany, you brought up the revolution in Scotland. We think very heavily because we got Queen Mary versus Queen Elizabeth, kind of that conflict, that Scottish-English conflict. But Ireland was kind of off to the side, very much engaging in that same issue of being low-key colonized by their neighbors.
Yeah, they definitely got the short end of the stick in the Isles.
Yeah. Scotland put up a good fight, but Ireland was very much caught off guard when it came to the conflicts that erupted between them. And so what happens is that you would get Irishmen who would come in, and they're very obviously Irish, because they're also I think they kind of navigated this similar but different space to the Scottish, because their accent is different. So it's very, you can't confuse Irish and Scottish, but they're also from this different island. So that they're
also the religion. If you're Catholic Irish, then it's, I mean,
Church
they basically blamed the Great Fire of 1666 on Catholics, even though it was known that it was just, a baker who left her oven on or something. Yeah. So there were Protestant Irish people as well, and different, religions and sects. So, I mean, but it was still kind of a very, especially mostly just because of the religion, but also because of these other reasons, that could also play a factor. Not to just totally get into this random discussion.
Yeah. This nice long tangent.
Yes.
But yeah, no, that's exactly, Burke is just very aggressively trying to prove that, look, I can dance, Dance Monkey, and he's doing it.
Yeah.
So. And that's not to undersell his white male privilege, but is existing this very different way. I think that was that was something, actually, I can't remember what we're talking about, but navigating this in the same sense, so we're looking at both of them as these subjugated groups. So she's a woman, but she's English, and she's from a little bit of a higher class, not necessarily high class, but the higher end of middle class because she's got the education. And then he is like definitely a well-off white man, but he's Irish. So they both got like a kind of a butt to them.
Mm-hmm.
However, she like they're coming at it from their very different stances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because there is this like this sense when you've got groups like this, I shouldn't say it like that, but like there's the notion that because he's a man, he still benefits from patriarchy. And so because she's a woman, but she's white, she still benefits from white supremacy. And that's true. And so like people consciously and unconsciously are also very aware of the way that they navigate like the structures of our oppression, because the 18th century was very much establishing the way that we have it structured now. And so what's funny is that you would think that because he's Irish, he would come from a more subversive stance like she does, and like the other way around, where because she's English, maybe she would come from a more like traditionalist view. But she doesn't.
Yeah, I think, and of course this is all,
this is all speculation.
Speculation, yes.
It's just us exploring.
Yeah, I'm like, this isn't actually what was happening, but it is. Burke had goals. He had a hunger for some kind of power position.
Yeah.
Wollstonecraft didn't.
Yeah.
She was already coming from a deficit in that regard. She wasn't looking to gain any power or notoriety other than actually like fighting her cause. And I think there's something to that. Burke wasn't, gung ho, like wanting the world to be a monarchy. That's not like really what he's, he's just saying that to, rub the right people.
Yep. Just rub the right elbows.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's not to say that she should have been, or maybe she was secretly, but rather that like the fact that she wasn't almost attests just as much as the fact that she like wrote this to how ready she was for things to change.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, I mean, maybe kind of directing us back to like Wollstonecraft and like her works. What else have you guys read by her? And like, maybe we can kind of talk about her.
Well, I've read Letters.
Yes.
One of my favorite scenes in Letters. I guess we can just kind of do that now.
Yeah.
Since
it's an amazing book. And if there is a book you want to read that isn't, other than Vindication of the Rights of Woman, I would suggest Letters because it is beautifully written.
Yes. So the full title is
Letters
written
during a short residence in Norway, Denmark.
Sweden and Denmark.
Yeah, Sweden and Denmark.
Just let Bethany take that one away.
Yeah,
I've written it enough times. I've typed it. Oh, it's right here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think we have the same copy.
It doesn't have the full title, but
I know that's why I was like, I looked at it and I was like, that doesn't look right.
A true 18th century. Yeah, letters written during a short residence in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark.
So that one was after she had her first child. And so I like the way that she kind of navigates that a little bit differently as a mother at that point.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite scenes, especially coming back to this notion of her kind of seeing like a right and a wrong way to engage with society as a woman, is that she is at an inn at one point. I think she's just like having dinner or something. She's having a meal. And she's commenting about this young woman who's walking around. And she's like reminiscing on this later. And she's talking about how like she kind of had a negative opinion of her at first. She thinks that she's not dressing up her class and she's not doing this or that correctly. She's being a little bit too personable, a little bit too popular with the people that work there. And so the woman eventually comes up to her, is taking her order or something. They have a small exchange. And she finds out the woman is actually like the wife of the innkeeper. Like she is like ostensibly like the woman of the house that they're all staying at. And so she's like, Mary has this realization that she completely judged this woman wrong. And that like her own prejudices are still something that she's constantly working through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to, again, like, I guess my digression on like the co-opting of the term woke and stay woke
Mm-hmm.
versus a constant like praxis of progressive, like learning about other people, is to acknowledge that occasionally you're wrong.
Yeah.
And you will
absolutely.
continue to occasionally be wrong, especially when it's like identities and spaces that you don't typically inhabit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you notice in her later works, it becomes less of a statement about what she believes and more of a demonstration, or her actually going through the motions of what she believes everyone should have the opportunity to do, which is what you were just explaining. She does this in her account of the revolution, but I feel like Letters is very much the climax of this. It is the apex of what she believes all women should be capable and be able to do, which is to take what is around you and feel something.
Yeah.
And then reflect on it.
Yes.
And then act in a way and learn and act in the way in the society that reconciles that. One of her quotes is, we feel forcibly, we reason deeply when we feel forcibly.
That's your tattoo.
Yeah, that's my tattoo. Because you can't reason without feeling, and you can't, I like that because the feeling precedes the reason. Yeah. And that is very feminine, masculine. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of the reason that Letters hits home so much like more aggressively than her reflections on the revolution is because it's an account of her like very daily interactions.
Yes.
It's one thing to talk about it with the revolution, which is a very politically charged, very active time, but that's not all the time. And so it's like, how do you engage with that kind of theory, with that lifestyle choice that you've embraced in just normal daily things?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, just to kind of round that out as well, is like, that becomes a big issue nowadays where people very aggressively become like internet activists, where they're posting the black square and they're like #MeToo, but then a couple of weeks later it's all dead. And it's because we haven't learned how to engage with it in our everyday life.
In a real way.
You have to constantly be back and forth with this kind of rhetoric. And with like this lifestyle and like the practicing of that lifestyle. So
yeah, I feel like in her literary career, her feminist treatise, her arguments with Burke, her historical view of the revolution was very much the most masculine space that she tried to take, because history was a very masculine space. And what she did, and what my dissertation was about, was that she conflated the public and the private through not only through her theories about the events of the revolution and what was actually happening, and we touched on that, but actually through the way that she wrote it. So she would combine, very objective events that were happening, non-biased, very like masculine kind of form. And then she would reflect on it and how it mattered to her in her daily life. And so that was kind of like the bulk work of like her kind of putting people through a loop about, like, she got a lot of criticism over it. Like, they were like, what's going on? Why is she, John Adams read her historical account of the revolution, and made a note in there that I found, and I thought it was so funny because he was just like, she just kind of just goes on these flights of like figurative speech, and it's a little too flowery or something like that, and it's just funny because but he read the whole thing, and
he must have enjoyed some
he read the whole thing and had notes, and like he even said like, oh, that's a good point, like, you know, it wasn't all bad. But Letters is very much probably the most feminine you know, form style that she has written. And I love it because it's also paired with her melancholy and depression. And her being a mother.
I do think a lot of that like femininity that we read in it comes back to her being a mother, because like in Vindication of the Rights of Women, she's engaging with this as just like a figure, as like a philosopher, as a voice, but then seeing her practice it, and especially practice it as this kind of traditional trope of womanhood, as like the mother figure, brings like a whole new level to this philosophy that she's trying to push.
I also love that she comes to Scandinavia with like a wet nurse or whatever. But she's doing business.
Oh yeah, we
don't know. She's like, she's not at home. Like, you know, she's living this like very like free life that a lot of like women who have a child can't. And it's a bit of that too.
We don't hear enough about it in there, which is fair because it was supposed to be like secret business. But she's almost underselling herself too by just making this seem like this kind of leisurely vacation.
But of course that was the popular type of you know like,
letters at the time.
Letters at the time, so that's what people wanted to read.
It's I think travel books.
Exactly.
Nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that's like really interesting to me is like, I feel like kind of what, and like if I can like summarize what both of you guys are saying, it seems to me like there is on the one hand this kind of larger engagement with this kind of goal that she has to emancipate women from this like constrictive social construct. But then also on the flip side, it's like through these like tiny these moments where we're able to see her, the minutiae of her everyday life, where she's able to kind of practice this praxis that you talk about. It's like, not only does she want women to have rights, but she also wants women to like be able to have the tools to utilize those rights, I think.
No, exactly. Because people very well could have just started educating women left and right, and then still been like, well, get married now and do nothing. Do none of it.
Oh yeah. And women were getting educated. And you know,
and
in the 19th century, in the 19th century as well. A good book on that is Middlemarch, where the main character is educated, and she's very interested in like travel and like learning more and talking about philosophical ideas. And so she marries this man who is very philosophical, but then he just doesn't want her to do anything with it. And it's
my God, same with like Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. There's this like, it's the new woman character, which is like this kind of second wave feminism. I guess you can call it second wave. But it's like, you know, she's this, you know, woman that wears trousers and reads books and rides bicycles and stuff. But, you know, she is just so conflicted by like worrying about having to marry him. He wants to marry her, but she doesn't know if like she does feel will sacrifice her freedom. And I remember when I took this Victorian literature class, everyone like hated her. And I thought, no, this woman is thinking. She's thinking about her choices, and she cares about herself and her freedom. And I hated that everyone thought she was so wishy-washy. I was like, no, she's really struggling with something. Like people just didn't understand that like this was a big, you know, it would have been a big sacrifice for her. And so it's like definitely like a trope, a literary trope.
We have a very, very skim understanding of just how many rights women would give up in marriage, and not just like from the like Victorian, Georgian, all of those periods, but like from 40 years ago. Like it was until just about like the mid 20th century, it was still very much like signing a woman away to her new owners, unfortunately. We didn't have the right to our own credit cards. We didn't have the right to ownership of like property, whether it's houses or cars. And that's like, if she could even drive. I think it was my grandma couldn't even drive until she was like an adult.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because she didn't want to. It was because it just wasn't offered. It wasn't available. It was unheard of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a very low conception of what marriage meant. Well, it's very romanticized now.
Yeah. Well, and then the people, and then the women that we do that are notable have these kind of extenuating circumstances that have brought them to that point. And so we kind of look at them and think, oh, well, you know, they can write, they can publish. And it's like, okay, but that was that was one girl.
Yeah.
That was allowed because she knew someone, or, you know, there's a lot of luck involved, I think, as well. That
a lot of the privilege that we just like gets lost in the historical record. That we have to kind of like go back and read through the lines for.
Well, and also just the basic fact, as you guys have already kind of mentioned, the fact, you know, we're reading about this. And that's because this person was able to publish and write about it and share their story. Like, you know, there are, like, as Melissa said, countless stories that we will never know.
Yeah.
Because they weren't able to have that opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah. I think on that note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
So that's the 18th century, you guys.
Yeah. It's just Mary Wollstonecraft.
Yep. Nobody else. In fact, we made Burke up. He doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Neither do his clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those definitely don't exist. Okay. So Bethany, actually, hold on. Scratch that, reverse it. Thank you very much, Taylin, for joining us again.
Yes.
To talk about many books this time, not just a single one.
It was really fun.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for taking time out of your PhD to
Yes.
be on our little podcast.
I will tell you, this is more than I've ever had the opportunity to talk in class. So it's actually a pleasure. You know, most of the time it's the professor talking and I'm just sitting there biting my tongue. So
really, because Melissa and I talked a lot.
Yeah, we have a problem. We would ask each other after class, like, are we the problem? Should we be shutting up? We never did. But.
No, we were the loudest ones.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate we would just space and opportunity.
Yes. Yes. No, I'm glad. And that's kind of the point, right? Like that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, until next time.
Yeah. Where can you find us? Oh, wait, did we already do that?
We did, but we can do it again. Yeah. You can find us on Instagram at In Bed with Books Pod. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch video versions and also hear us talk about film. But yeah, we do have a website. Thank you. inbedwithbookspod.com. We have a blog. We talk about things on there. So yeah, until next time, happy reading.
Happy reading.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.